The live-action Fullmetal Alchemist movie has finally come out, and it's not great. It's certainly not the worst live-action anime adaptation. I think that honor still goes to Dragon Ball Evolution, but I still wouldn't recommend watching it to anyone, regardless if they've seen the anime or not. I will, however, be reviewing this movie as someone who's seen both of the shows, so there will be spoilers moving forward, and if... Oh, did you miss that? That was the entirety of Trisha Elric's screen time. The mother, who's the catalyst for everything that happens in this movie, is dead within seconds of meeting her, and it happens so suddenly that I actually laughed out loud when I first saw it. The next few scenes play out how I think they should, with the addition of a weird tornado, but they made the bizarre decision to leave out the after effects of the brothers' failed transmutation until later, and they completely skipped Renri's involvement in getting Ed his automail, which strikes me as a huge missed opportunity to establish her character, especially given how big of a role she plays in this movie. Instead, the movie cuts to the end of the Lior arc, where Ed is chasing the priest through the streets, and this is where one of my major complaints with the action scenes start. Everybody's reactions are so slow. Ed gets hit by the priest's first attack, and that's fine. He was distracted and not looking ahead of him. But watch how long Ed just stands in the middle of the road as the next attack comes straight at him. I was expecting him to transmute the ground to get out of the way or make a wall to block it, but instead he just stands there and allows himself to get hit again. The next attack, when the priest summons the stone creatures to fight for him, is where my second major complaint from the action comes from. Nothing feels like it has any weight behind it. Ed barely has to touch the creatures before they explode, and in the case where he doesn't even hit one, it just breaks itself on the wall behind him anyways. Even when Ed is pushed back by one, it feels like there's no real force behind it when it pins him against the wall. After Ed finally defeats the priest, Colonel Mustang arrives with a handful of armed members of the police, including Riza Hawkeye, and explains that the Philosopher's Stone the priest was using is a fake, and somehow during this exchange, the priest manages to escape. At first I thought this was just a dumb gag, but it's later revealed that he actually managed to evade capture. This is a perfect example of what I meant when I mentioned that everyone's reactions were too slow. The standard military guards aside, there is no way that a man who runs like this could get away from Mustang, Hawkeye, and both Elric brothers, even if one is handcuffed. We then get introduced to the only homunculi in this movie, envy, lust, and gluttony, and for some reason every time they appear in a scene there's this weird breathing noise that really started to get on my nerves. While Al repairs the damage that Ed caused to the town, he delivers a really awkward and basic explanation of the brothers' reputation and the laws of equivalent exchange. I'm not going to complain too much about the CGI, it is what it is, but Al's animations really do bug me. Renri suddenly appears, presumably because she somehow knew that Ed would need his automail repaired, but it's never explained, and all we hear from her backstory during a later scene is that she's Ed's automail mechanic and that they grew up in the same town. After Ed is reprimanded for the damages he caused to the town, General Haruko, who's the highest military figure we see in this movie, essentially filling in for the role of the Fuhrer, suggests that the Elrics go and visit Shao Tucker to see if he can help them find a way to get their bodies back. In the meantime, it's shown that the Elrics and Renri are staying at Hughes' house, and while he feels the most like his anime counterpart, the movie glances over a lot of important points in his story that I'll get to in a little bit. After dinner, there's a 7-minute long reenactment of what happened to the Elrics after they failed to bring their mother back to life, and the only reason I could think of why they would choose to put that part of the movie now instead of at the beginning would be that they didn't want to use the child actors for it. I think this was another misstep, because if they spent just a few minutes showing Ed as a child going to Renri's house for help, it would have done a lot more to develop the relationship between all of the characters. Most of the Shao Tucker arc plays out the same as it does in the anime, with two major exceptions. He's the one who tells Al that his memories are fake, presumably just to be a dick, and he also tells Ed about Dr. Marco, who he goes to find immediately, leaving Al to undergo some kind of hypnotherapy. The Dr. Marco arc, while similar to the anime version, also plays out differently, and not really for the better. For some reason, Renri decides to go visit Marco along with Ed, I'm assuming to fill in for the absence of Major Armstrong, who regrettably is never mentioned in this movie. The second change to the story is that during the conversation with Marco, Lust shows up to his house and kills him, saying that he's no longer needed for their plans. In the context of the movie, this kind of works because none of the plot lines go past the point where they find Laboratory 5, and Scar is also not in the movie, so Marco's active role in the story is complete. Where this change feels off to me is that as far as I can remember, the homunculi want as many talented alchemists to know how to create the Philosopher's Stones and pass the knowledge on in order to perpetuate their plans, so it seems short-sighted and out of nowhere to kill Marco right as he's hoping to lead the Elric brothers into their scheme. After learning about the existence of Laboratory 5, Ed returns to Shao Tucker's house to finish his arc, and we finally see the Nina and Alexander Chimera, who looks more like Sora's monster form from the new Kingdom Hearts 3 trailer than a distraught creature that needs to be put out of their misery. When Ed decides to get physical with Shao Tucker, there's another perfect example of nothing feeling like it has any weight behind it. Ed is repeatedly punching Shao in the face with his automail arm, but it looks and sounds like he might as well be punching a pillow. The scene after that is when the brothers spend several days in the library studying and trying to figure out how to make a Philosopher's Stone and find Lab 5, and this is where a lot of the changes I don't agree with start to happen. Ed won't let Al help him study because it's too dangerous. Lieutenant Ross is just there to give Ed a sandwich, not watch over him as a bodyguard, and Ed never makes any discoveries. In fact, General Haruko just shows up at one point and lies to them about where Lab 5 is to keep the plot going. Even though it was apparently too dangerous to have Al help him read some books, Ed decides to take him and Winry to where they think Lab 5 is, and this is when Al decides to confront Ed about his suspicions that his memories are fake. Just like in the anime, they fight, and Al believes that he's not an artificial soul after Winry yells at him a bunch. In the anime, this was a very moving scene, but it feels incredibly out of place and brought to a conclusion at such a weird point in time in the movie. It's also at this time, now that Ed has brought Winry along for every part of the movie, that I'd like to address what I think the biggest problem with her character is. In the anime, Winry was Ed's last tie to his life outside of the military. After him and Al burned down their childhood house, they had nowhere to go back to, except to Winry and her grandmother. For the most part, when there was a scene involving Winry, the pace of the show was a lot slower, and the focus was taken away from the action and stress of Ed's normal military life. In the movie, however, there is no separation between Ed's military life and the idyllic life back in the countryside. There's not even a mention of the message Ed etched into his pocket watch about remembering the day the brothers burned their old house down. Instead of feeling like a character the brothers can feel at home with, she comes off like a goofy sidekick who contributes nothing but getting herself put into danger. I mentioned before that the movie glances over a lot of important points in regards to Hughes, and this is also where that comes to a head. After hearing about riots in Lior, Hughes is able to recognize that there's a pattern forming on the map resembling a transmutation circle, which he then uses to find the location of the real Lab 5, and at this point Lust tries to kill him. The reason this is a problem in the movie is that there is no plot involving the larger transmutation circle like there is in the anime, so it makes no sense for a pattern to be there. The next few things are more of a personal complaint because they don't actually affect anything related to the plot of the movie, but Hughes never had his daughter. The scene where he's able to tell Lieutenant Ross is a fake based on her mole is instead given to Mustang, and because the movie ends right after the events at Lab 5, he never even gets a funeral. These scenes were all things that really stood out to me when I watched the anime, and it feels like a waste not to at least say that his daughter was born. Because Envy was disguised as Mustang when he shot Hughes, Ed and Hawkeye are taken into custody, which they break out of quickly enough. Hawkeye tells Ed that Lab 5 is actually located at the old POW camp, and when Mustang is caught heading there, there's another scene showing just how slow everyone's reactions are. Even though there were several men who were ordered to shoot Mustang if he refused to be taken into custody, they all just stand still as he burns who they think is Lieutenant Ross to a crisp. Hey, you want to see some really bad CGI? Of course you do. Here you go. You're welcome. Roy gets stabbed by Lust and Ed goes on ahead to Lab 5 where the story will finally come to a close in just 40 more minutes. After all of the rushed scenes and characters left out, an entire 1/3 of the movie takes place in just one building and the alleyways around it. When Ed enters Lab 5, he finds Shao Tucker, who is set free by General Haruko in order to kidnap Al and Renry as well as to teach him how to use the fake Philosopher's Stones. When Shao tells Ed to take off his automail so that he can't transmute anymore, Ed responds by actually breaking it off. It makes absolutely no sense why there wouldn't be a way for him to remove it without damaging it, but it's okay I guess, because later he just asks Winry to temporarily attach it with no tools and she does a fine enough job. It's finally revealed that the Philosopher's Stone's his people and that Marco and his team had dabbled just a little bit in making them using a fallen POWs. Tucker says that he's doing everything for more than just a few fake Philosopher's Stones, but before he can reveal what it is, Lust kills him, which makes his involvement at this point make no sense. If General Haruko wanted to use Al and Winry as collateral, he could have just had them picked up and arrested at the same time they arrested Ed after Hughes' death. General Haruko explains that his plan was to use the stones to create an army of artificial homunculi, and things go about as well for him as you would expect before turning most of the remainder of the movie into a weird zombie flick. There's almost a 10-second window after Haruko senses that something is wrong with his zombie army, but he just stands there and allows himself to be eaten. There's honestly not much to say about the last 20 minutes of the movie. Hawkeye leads a small group to kill the zombies, Ed and Mustang kill Lust and Envy by setting them on fire over and over and over again, and finally after getting his hands on a decent-sized Philosopher's Stone from Envy, he decides against using it because of all the human sacrifices that went into making it. Gluttony managed to escape, but I guess it doesn't really matter because the movie's about to end and we can all move on with our lives. The last scene has the trio boarding a train and Ed swearing to find a way to restore their bodies that doesn't involve using a Philosopher's Stone, and then the credits start to roll. There's an after credits reveal that shows that Envy isn't dead, but with how far off the rails they took the story, I'm not even sure what they could be planning with that, if anything. I said at the start of my video that this wasn't the worst anime adaptation, but while it didn't make me quit watching, I spent most of my time either bored or annoyed at what I was looking at. Honestly, the best thing I could say about this movie is that it made me want to go back and rewatch the originals, and if it manages to drive up DVD sales of the anime even just a little bit, maybe they can call it a successful movie. I'm Devin from Video 2, and if you like this video, leave a like and consider subscribing. If I was wrong about anything, or if you have something else to add, feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for watching.